how can governments encourage social cohesiveness and people-centric communities?
So allow me to zoom out a little bit more about the main challenge. The main challenge is that cities are growing by the day, and the rate of urbanization is not slowing down. Already half of the global population lives in cities, and by 2050, another 2.5 billion will be added to this number. That creates a lot of stress on governments and local authorities in providing the infrastructure, but not only the heavy infrastructure in terms of water, power, energy, sewage, but more on the soft side of the infrastructure, education, healthcare, a sense of belonging. The previous panelists all mentioned the sense of belonging. And the more we live in cities, the less we feel that we belong into the cities. And this is where I think there is an increasingly important role for the private sector to play a role. We find ourselves a little bit more agile than the governments. We find ourselves a little bit closer to the communities in terms of gathering the data.
Yeah.
And this is where we think that the private sector can play a big role in shaping the future of the cities.
You mentioned that kind of on the periphery of all of those things that come together to make it successful. What have you witnessed? What is the biggest feedback you've got from communities that you've helped create then?
So first, again, we need to create communities that have more sense of belonging. With the digital age, people are even less and less interacting. We need to artificially go back to an era where there are more physical interactions. The biggest challenge is the digital layer is replacing the physical layer. What we are trying to achieve is to enhance the physical layer, better opportunities to interact with people, and have the digital layer on top of it, not to replace it, actually.
Amit, is that what you foresee as being a successful city structure in terms of creating this conducive place to innovation, harmony, and prosperity?
Yeah, I think having listened to some of the prior conversations you've had today, there's been a lot of good talk about mobility and making life, gaining back time and being more efficient. The onus is on the physical side to actually deliver those elements for people. It's really a lot about work, live, and play. It's an overused, I would say, phrase for how we should be building communities in this day and age. But the reality is we need to think about that because that's what creates effectively that time and that opportunity for people. So making sure we think about that, with the digital overlay is amongst many other ways in which we can deliver that.
When we go back to basics, though, how is that digital transformation meeting the demands? What are we seeing now, how things have progressed?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing is to go back to the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Ultimately, infrastructure enables, and a lot of the conversation about how we get to those 5-minute cities, those 10, 20-minute cities. The digital overlay is what I think comes at the end of that journey. The first part of that journey is making sure that we have something that economically enables us to live in those communities in a very sustainable way. And I think that when you look at somewhere like Dubai, the infrastructure came first. It's very it's been looking forward for the 10 or 20 years ahead of that, and that's what creates or enables us to live in those communities. Of course, the digital overlay is that cream on top of the coffee that allows us to be that much more efficient.
I did touch on this, I think, on not the previous panel, but the one before, but this issue of inclusivity, making sure that we're not leaving anybody behind, so these communities are available to all.
So the concept of live, work, and play is extremely valid still. And if you add to it the layer of belong, I think it becomes more important. We are seeing recently with the pandemic, with the crisis happening around the world also, there is a constant need to reinvent how we interact and how we design our cities. It seems that our cities are very good to survive, but whenever there is a massive event, whether a pandemic, whether an earthquake, it falls apart. Yeah. I think there is a lot of work on that front, and inclusivity is only one component of that. We are, as Majid al-Futtaim, we are very much data-driven, and data drives our strategy. And I think the more we understand what our customer want and foresee what are the future customer needs, I think we can play a better role. If you look at in this part of the world, it's a very, very young population. and very different from the other more developed societies. And we need to double our efforts in understanding what are the future needs of this population.
And what does it take to design that purpose in these urban environments?
So it's part of a full placemaking philosophy where you really have to look at the culture, the aspiration of this society, and be in touch with this culture and society. Unless you understand what are the main drivers of these aspirations, you kind of design something that is a cookie cutter approach that is just replicated all over the place. You need to have a different approach for different cities, different part of the city itself, different demographics, different segments of the market. And I think this is what differentiates a very successful and thriving city from a slow city or a city that does not attract new people to move in. And you can see that especially in Dubai, where Dubai keeps attracting a lot of people to come to this great place.
How does that impact, and this is a question for both of you, how does that impact a city that is very transient? As the world becomes a smaller place, we're seeing a lot more movement globally.
So, of course, if you take the example of Dubai, this is a city that creates plenty of opportunities, jobs, innovation, tourism, shopping. And I think when you have this agility in the thinking of recreating yourself, recreating the next big thing every time, and succeeding in delivery, I think the biggest issue with governments is the rate of success.
Yeah.
And what we see in this part of the world is an extreme high rate of success. And this is, I think, what makes Dubai still, and it will remain, a very attractive city.
Thank you. Amit, how does government service and delivery enable purpose within these urban communities?
So I would go back to the transient point you just mentioned, because almost if you believe in efficient capital markets or efficient markets, transiency is the greatest way to market the expectation of what the market wants, what the investor wants, what the end user wants. And to tie that into the question of how does the government enable that, if the government is working synonymously with that transient nature and understanding the capital flows and what people desire and want, then that allows us to build into that space. So, for example, in Dubai, the creation of the Golden Visa program, amongst others, allows the understanding of a longer generational aspect of living. People want to put down their roots, etc. And you start to see movements between single family and multifamily. So going on to the point that was just made was, it's not just about how overall cities are built, but how within those cities are built. So the transient nature actually helps us determine where to move capital. It allows private parties or private entrepreneurs to participate in that discussion. And ultimately, when it's economically sustainable, you'll have sustainable micro communities as well as sustainable communities. And so I think that natural nature of transience allows us to actually deliver cities that are for today or wanted today, but for tomorrow kind of aspect.
What have we seen in terms of economic impact of, we keep bringing it back to Dubai and what we've seen, how we've seen this fabulous city transform over the last decade or so?
So, of course, when you have that level of foreign investment that comes in, it's catalyzed by the government enablement to allow programs that allow people. We talk about mobility within a city, but we want to have mobility to the city in the first place as well. And so when you combine those elements together, it allows communities to flourish because, as I said, it was economically sustainable. People feel like they're participating in their community. They get to drive the end conclusion. And if you wheel that all the way back, the way in which government can play a part, which is very useful here in the Dubai, is we think about what is the end goal, and then we collaborate with all the parties on the first day. There's a very famous sign-off sheet that we work on here where we get the Roads and Transport Authority or the utility provider or the sewage provider, the overall master plan working towards a specific goal. I think when you put all of that together and you collaborate from the beginning with the anticipation of what is the end goal, that allows a very seamless execution and the delivery of communities. You want to see them happen in front of you.
Well, we have one here, an urban master plan that we're working towards. How important is that for cities globally, Hawazen? Should they have these kind of blueprints right from the off?
Yeah, you would hope that every city will follow this model, frankly. Most cities have urban master plans, but again, it fails at the execution level. I think what makes also Dubai very special is the closeness or the integration of the private sector. If you look at globally, the gap between all governments being able to deliver that infrastructure versus the available funding, unless the funding comes from the capital market or the private sector, there is this huge gap of at least the private sector only contributes now to 0.2% of the global infrastructure. They should be able to contribute up to 5% to be able to really bring the urban infrastructure to its current level. And that is without including everything we want to achieve in terms of sustainability.
How are they going to get there? You mentioned those specific percentages.
In Dubai,
Yeah.
I think in Dubai we are beyond that. What I'm talking is the global issue that we have. I think in Dubai the sustainability is at heart, and the government and the private sector. Most of the private enterprises that I know of have sustainability targets. Mm-hmm. And in our case, we have green bonds, and we are way ahead of a lot of other players, but we are very proud of it. And not only at the community level, but at the asset level. And I think this should be a benchmark for other cities to follow through.
What have you seen as being the biggest challenge, that we've had to overcome and something that we're having to work on moving forwards?
There are very important and powerful agendas around sustainability and making, from both environmental aspect, etc. I think figuring out, you mentioned in Dubai, the private sector contribution to infrastructure is significant as well, because, we create micro communities and then they stitch into a much larger urban community. So I do think that the setting of an urban agenda is very important. I think Dubai has done that excellently. And I think then fulfilling your part into that is critical. But making sure that you do that sustainably is very important. And that means you do need more private sector participation, not just in the infrastructure element, but in the actual development of the communities thereafter. So for me, the most important thing is to make sure that it's economically sustainable. People see that as a 1 cycle, 2 cycle, 3 cycle investment. And when they feel that they can move through that, that will make it a much more achievable. So for me, that's the biggest element.
Thank you. How important is corporate responsibility? I'm going to ask you both this, but we'll start with you, Amit. How important is it?
I think, when you're building communities, you have to think about all aspects of that community, as many people have discussed. But when we physically build it, I think we have a sense of that. It's about creating those public amenities. It's creating those, the areas for education, for entertainment, but having them work seamlessly together. It is a deep challenge, but I think understanding that at a fundamental level is very important when you're designing it physically. Once you get that right, the communities develop much deeper relationships amongst themselves, and we see the fruits of that labor later on.
Hawazen, what are your thoughts on that?
So it is embedded, I think, unless that every member of the community feels that he is part of that community and is thriving, you will have some disengagement. What we are working now, for example, on people who stay at home, how can we engage them in some voluntary work, something that can give back to the society. And what we see is really a high level of engagement, especially in this part of the world. People are willing to give back to society. And we need to leverage that latent power of people who are not working during the day.
How important is it for, making sure that these urban communities we create are open to second generation families? It's not just what we're seeing. We talked about the transient community earlier. How important is that to make sure that people have that roots and they feel that they belong, that sense of belonging?
It's a very elusive sense, and you have really to capture it. And I think what you can see from Dubai, people used to say on average 4 to 6 years. And now with the amendments to the golden visa and the company laws, people are setting roots in this part of the world. And you can see immediately that the average span has increased. A lot of people that were thinking of Dubai as one station in their life have decided already to retire in Dubai and set up for retirement. So I think this is something that we can leverage on in terms of what are other activities they can do post-retirement. And as I said, Dubai is in excellent shape compared to the others.
We keep talking about sustainability, but not even from a business perspective. Amit, how important is that from a social angle, for the people who are wanting to be the fabric of these communities, or kind of social conscience?
So I think that, that as we're talking about, you're talking about generational moves,
Yeah.
right? That's when you have deep-rooted investments. So it comes back to the economics of that. If you've invested in a home and you now have the promise of being able to live there into your retirement, etc., having your children move on and grow from that is almost, as I said, the fruits of that labor for those children. But having great education systems, having jobs that are created after that, and the creation of these communities, as I said, we talk about work, live, and play. We have one, for example, in City Walk, for example, where you have everything from entertainment, like an arena or a green planet, but you have you have education, you have a university in there as well. You have people living in there. It's green, it's walkable. So that sense of belonging, engagement, as we said, that is driven by people wanting to make their community better and feel better. That sense of being able to raise those issues within your community and being able to have them dealt with as well, that sense of openness and transparency is very important. So from a sustainability perspective, there's a great mechanism, I would say, that can be delivered by governments that allow communities to, voice those opinions and have those acted upon.
We talk about digital transformation. How has that really impacted and affected what you guys do?
So if I may add on sustainability, I think we need to do a better job of explaining what sustainability is.
Sure.
Most of residents understand sustainability as something that they have to pay a little bit extra for it. Mm-hmm. And we need to shift that thinking that this is actually creating a better environment for them and their kids. And this answers back to your previous question about multi-generational. If we can design communities and homes that adapt to this multi-generational, that the home can grow or shrink with the needs of its inhabitants, and also the community can take in this extra requirement, be it digital, be it sustainability, more and more breakthroughs in sustainability. So the digital element is what helps us actually capture all of this information. Yeah. And for us, being very close to the customer is really what makes it or breaks it. And then we also, of course, have this data scientists, the advanced analytics, but frankly, unless the initial data is useful, it doesn't come up with great answers.
But I would just like to thank our audience for participating as well and being here and listening to this. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen. Amit Kaushal, CEO, Dubai Holding Group, and Hawazen Esber, Chief Executive Officer, Communities, Majid Al Futtaim. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your World Government Summit. Thank you.